The night sky over Paris glimmered with the electric promise of Fashion Week. A mile-long red carpet stretched toward the entrance of the Palais Garnier, where the city's most glamorous, influential, and cutthroat elites gathered under 1,000 camera flashes. Photographers barked names, flashes popped like lightning, and the air vibrated with the hum of ambition, vanity, and envy. Among the arriving guests, one man seemed to drink it all in as if the world had been built for him alone. Adrian Locke, self-made millionaire and founder of Locke Ventures. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, he moved with the arrogance of someone convinced every eye in the room should be on him. And tonight, he had made sure of it. On his arm was Giselle Moreau, a French model, half his age, her silver gown clinging to her like a second skin. Her laughter, high, musical, and deliberately loud, cut through the murmur of the crowd. She tilted her head just enough to make sure the cameras caught the diamond necklace around her throat, a necklace Adrian had bought just that afternoon. To the photographers, they were the perfect Fashion Week couple, rich, beautiful, and utterly unashamed. To the gossip-hungry crowd, they were a walking scandal. Everyone knew Adrian had a wife, and everyone knew she was pregnant. But Adrian didn't care. In his mind, Evelyn Locke was far away in London, tucked into their penthouse, too exhausted from her pregnancy to even think about traveling. She was quiet, gentle, and, he believed, entirely dependent on him. She wouldn't dare confront him here. Not at an event like this. Not with the entire fashion world watching. What Adrian didn't know, what would turn his entire world upside down before the night was over, was that Evelyn wasn't just in Paris. She wasn't just attending Fashion Week. She was the single largest private investor in the very fashion house whose show he was here to see. And in less than an hour, she would walk into this same building and burn his carefully crafted image to the ground. Inside the grand marble foyer, the air was heavy with perfume and the scent of fresh-cut flowers arranged in towering crystal vases. Waiters in black suits floated between the guests with trays of champagne. Conversations swirled in French, English, and Italian, mingling with the low thump of bass from the runway hall beyond. Adrian guided Giselle toward a knot of investors and celebrities, shaking hands, exchanging smirks, his free hand brushing the small of her back in a gesture meant to be seen. Giselle preened under the attention, leaning in to whisper things that made him laugh loudly, as though to prove to the room that he was untouchable. From a distance, people glanced, whispered, and looked away quickly. No one wanted to be the one to mention his wife. This was Fashion Week. Everyone had their own secrets to protect. A photographer stepped forward, raising his camera. "Adrian, over here. And Giselle, give us a smile." They posed, the diamond necklace glittering under the flash. Adrian tightened his arm around her waist, reveling in the moment. He didn't notice the quiet shift in the crowd near the main entrance. He didn't notice the ripple of whispers. Because at that very moment, Evelyn Locke was stepping out of a black Bentley onto the same red carpet. She was 6 months pregnant, but she carried herself with a poise that could have stopped traffic. Her gown was a deep emerald green, the silk flowing like water over her figure, its neckline sharp and regal. The dress wasn't from this season's collection. It was next season's, designed exclusively for her by the creative director himself. Her hair, swept into a sleek chignon, revealed diamond drop earrings worth more than most people's houses. On her arm was not just a date, but the man everyone in the room recognized instantly. Damien Hale, the elusive billionaire CEO of Hale International, known for his ruthless takeovers and his near-mythical status in the business world. The fact that he was here at all was shocking. The fact that he was here with Evelyn Locke was a detonation. The photographers erupted, flashes exploded, voices called her name as if she were the star of the night. "Evelyn! Evelyn! Over here! Who are you wearing?" Adrian's smile faltered for the first time. His head snapped toward the commotion, his mind taking a fraction too long to process what he was seeing. "Evelyn? Here? And with him?" She caught his gaze across the foyer. And in that single look, cool, steady, and utterly unafraid, he felt something he hadn't in years: uncertainty. Giselle shifted beside him, confused by the sudden change in his expression. "Who is that?" she whispered. Adrian swallowed hard, forcing a smirk that felt brittle. "My wife," he muttered. The murmurs around them grew louder. People were connecting the dots. Evelyn Locke, the long-absent wife, glowing with pregnancy, arriving with one of the most powerful men in the world. Whispers turned to speculation. Speculation turned to open stares. And beneath it all, the first faint scent of blood in the water. Evelyn didn't look away. She didn't smile. She simply inclined her head slightly, as if acknowledging an acquaintance she barely remembered, and then turned her attention to Damien, who leaned in to say something that made her laugh softly. Adrian's hand tightened on his champagne flute until his knuckles whitened. The glass didn't break, but something else inside him did. What he couldn't possibly know was that this was only the opening act. Because Evelyn hadn't come here simply to be seen. She had come to take back the power he'd stolen, and she had the perfect stage, the perfect audience, and the perfect moment waiting just beyond those runway doors. And when the lights went down and the show began, she would make sure the entire fashion world knew exactly who really owned the night. Before the world saw her as the breathtaking woman who stunned Paris Fashion Week, Evelyn Locke had been known for something else entirely: her invisibility. Born Evelyn Hartwell, she grew up in the shadow of the Hartwell Group, a global investment empire built by her grandfather and expanded by her father, Charles Hartwell. From London to New York, the Hartwell name meant power, wealth, and influence that could bend markets. But while the men in her family chased acquisitions, Evelyn's mother, Margaret, raised her to understand that true power often came from staying out of the spotlight until the moment was right. Margaret was elegant but practical, the kind of woman who could attend a state dinner in a couture gown and then spend the next morning kneeling in the garden with her hands in the soil. She taught Evelyn that humility wasn't weakness, it was armor. And Evelyn wore that armor well, blending into rooms full of egos big enough to eclipse the sun. By her late 20s, Evelyn had quietly become one of the most capable private investors in Europe. She didn't seek headlines, but the sharpest people in the business knew her name. When she invested in a company, fortunes changed, and unlike her father, she never lost sight of the human cost behind the numbers. It was during a charity gala in London, a fundraising event for children's arts programs, that she met Adrian Locke. He wasn't from her world of generational wealth. Adrian was a self-made millionaire in the property and venture capital space, charming and ambitious. He spoke with the restless energy of someone who believed they were destined for more. That night, he made her laugh. It wasn't easy to surprise her, but Adrian did. He teased her for wearing boardroom armor instead of a dress that would make her stand out. She had smiled, thinking he was different from the men who chased her for her name or her bank account. Their courtship was fast, intoxicating. Adrian didn't know the full extent of her wealth. She'd made sure of that. She told him she worked in private investment, which was true, but left out that she controlled billions in assets through shell companies and trusts. She wanted someone to love her without calculating her net worth. And when he proposed, she said yes, believing she'd found a man who saw her. The first years were good. They traveled, laughed, and dreamed together. Adrian was attentive, and she admired his work ethic. She even quietly helped his business from behind the scenes, connecting him to contacts he didn't realize came from her network. Every so often, she would hear a note of pride in his voice when he introduced her as my wife to his associates. But success changed Adrian. As his ventures took off, the humility that had once made him attractive gave way to arrogance. He began chasing flash instead of substance, lavish parties, fast cars, and a revolving door of networking. Dinners that seemed to involve more champagne models than actual investors. Evelyn noticed the subtle shift first in their conversations. He would interrupt her when she spoke about her own projects, steering the topic back to his latest deal. He started making decisions without asking for her input, even on matters that affected them both. When she suggested slowing down, he laughed and told her she didn't understand how the real world worked. The breaking point came months before Paris Fashion Week. She had just discovered she was pregnant. It wasn't planned, but it filled her with a quiet joy. She imagined telling him over dinner, expecting surprise, maybe even tears of happiness. Instead, when she shared the news, his reaction was cool, calculated. He congratulated her, but within days he was traveling more, spending less time at home, and avoiding conversations about the baby. She tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. She told herself he was just nervous, that the weight of impending fatherhood was heavy. But the truth became impossible to ignore when gossip reached her. Adrian had been seen at events with a model named Giselle Moreau. At first, she dismissed it as rumor. Then came the photographs. Adrian's hand at the small of Giselle's back, his lips dangerously close to her ear at a Monaco yacht party. Evelyn didn't confront him immediately. That wasn't her way. Instead, she began preparing quietly. She moved her investments into trusts he couldn't touch. She met with lawyers, and she accepted an offer from a friend in Paris. An investment opportunity with one of the top fashion houses showing at Fashion Week. The timing was perfect. It would give her a legitimate reason to be there without tipping her hand. By the time Adrian invited Giselle to Paris, Evelyn already knew. She knew what hotel they were staying at, what events they planned to attend, even the time they'd arrive at the Palais Garnier. And she knew that as the primary investor in the brand hosting that night's show, she would have the power to turn a glamorous evening into a public reckoning. Her father once told her that revenge was never the goal, that it was better to let your success speak for itself. But as she stood in front of the mirror in her emerald gown hours before the show, she allowed herself one small exception. This wasn't just about reclaiming her dignity. It was about making sure Adrian understood exactly who he had underestimated. When she walked into the venue with Damien Hale, it wasn't by accident. Damien had been a business ally for years, a man who valued privacy as much as she did. When she told him her plan, he didn't hesitate to support her. His presence by her side would send a message Adrian couldn't ignore, not just about her personal worth, but about the circles she moved in, the kind of power she wielded effortlessly. Every step down that red carpet was deliberate. Every flash of the cameras, every whispered name in the crowd was part of the performance. And when she locked eyes with Adrian across the foyer, she felt a calm settle over her. The pieces were in place. What Adrian didn't yet realize was that tonight's runway show had been subtly restructured in the last 24 hours. Evelyn's decision. The finale would feature a segment dedicated to women who define the future, and the models would walk wearing designs inspired by real female investors, leaders, and visionaries. One of those designs was hers, and when it appeared under the lights, it would come with a revelation no one, least of all Adrian, was prepared for. Because by the end of the night, the world wouldn't just see Evelyn Locke as a pregnant wife in a beautiful dress. They would see her for what she truly was. The owner of the stage, Adrian thought, belonged to him. The runway hall of the Palais Garnier was a cathedral of style that night. Ornate gold leaf ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and a polished runway that seemed to stretch into infinity. Rows of plush velvet chairs lined each side, occupied by fashion editors, celebrities, investors, and influencers, their chatter a low symphony of anticipation. Adrian Locke settled into his front row seat, with Giselle draped over his arm like a designer accessory. He had just enough champagne in his system to feel invincible. Around them, camera crews positioned themselves, checking angles for the live broadcast. This wasn't just a show. It was the show. The collection debut for Maison Verlaine, a brand poised to dominate the luxury market. Adrian had been boasting to everyone within earshot that he had exclusive access to Verlaine's next investment round. He'd even hinted that his connections might land him a stake before the night was over. In his mind, tonight was another opportunity to cement his status, not just as a millionaire, but as a man in control. What he didn't know was that the deal he'd been chasing for months had already been signed. The largest stake in Maison belonged to Evelyn Locke, and she was about to make that fact public. A hush fell as the lights dimmed, replaced by the deep thump of bass rolling through the room. The runway glowed under spotlights as the first model appeared, gliding with effortless grace in a shimmering silk gown. Cameras clicked in rapid bursts, and the crowd leaned forward, drinking in every detail. Adrian glanced at Giselle, smirking. "You see that? That's a €200,000 dress. This is the level I'm talking about." Giselle purred in response, brushing her hand against his thigh. She was here for the spectacle, not the business. Adrian didn't mind. In fact, He liked having her here. It made him feel untouchable. Halfway down the runway, the model passed Evelyn and Damien, who sat across from Adrian in the same front row. Evelyn's emerald gown caught the light, its rich hue a stark contrast to the monochrome palette favored by most guests. Her posture was flawless, her expression serene, but her eyes, when they met his, were knives wrapped in silk. Adrian's smirk faltered. Giselle noticed his sudden distraction and followed his gaze. "Isn't that?" she began, her voice dipping into uncertainty. "Yes," Adrian muttered, his jaw tight. "That's my wife." Giselle's perfectly lined brows arched. "She's here?" "She shouldn't be," he said under his breath, as if saying it could make it true. Across the runway, Damien leaned slightly toward Evelyn, murmuring something that made her lips curl into the faintest of smiles. Adrian hated the way they looked together, like equals, like allies. He had never seen Evelyn look so in command. The show continued, each look more daring and intricate than the last. But Adrian wasn't seeing the clothes anymore. His focus was locked on Evelyn, her calm confidence gnawing at his composure. He was used to her being soft-spoken, deferential in public. This version of her, radiant, magnetic, unapologetically present, was unsettling. The tension in the room shifted when the announcer's voice came over the speakers. "And now, for our final segment, Women Who Define the Future." The bass gave way to a steady, powerful drumbeat. The lights flared brighter, casting the runway in a golden glow. The first model emerged wearing a sleek, tailored suit embroidered with constellations and silver thread. The audience murmured appreciatively. The second model wore an ethereal gown inspired by architectural lines, with delicate beadwork forming the silhouette of a city skyline. Then came the third look, and the moment Adrian's stomach dropped. The announcer's voice rang clear. "This piece is dedicated to one of our most visionary investors, whose commitment to empowering women in business has shaped the future of Maison Verlaine. Designed exclusively in her honor, the Evelyn." Gasps rippled through the audience as a model stepped onto the runway in a breathtaking emerald gown, the exact shade Evelyn wore in her seat. The bodice was structured, powerful. The skirt flowed like liquid authority. A spotlight shifted, illuminating Evelyn herself as cameras swung toward her. Flashbulbs erupted. The murmurs turned into a wave of whispered recognition. People craned their necks, snapping photos of her and the model side by side. Adrian's mind scrambled. "Investor? Evelyn? What the hell is going on?" Giselle shifted uncomfortably. "Wait, she's an investor? In this?" Adrian didn't answer. His chest felt tight, his palms slick. He had been talking for weeks about getting in on the Verlaine deal. And now, in front of the most influential people in fashion, he was finding out his pregnant wife not only beat him to it, she owned the room. The finale continued, but Adrian barely heard the applause. Every time Evelyn's name was mentioned, it was another twist of the knife. By the time the last model had walked, the crowd was already buzzing, not about the clothes, but about Evelyn Locke. When the lights came up for the standing ovation, Evelyn rose gracefully, Damien beside her. She accepted congratulations from editors, designers, and investors like royalty receiving her court. Then, in a move that seemed both effortless and calculated, she crossed the runway toward Adrian. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing the drama. She stopped in front of him, her gaze steady. "Adrian," she said, her voice low but carrying. "Enjoying the show?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. "I'm glad," she continued, not waiting for a reply. "I've been working with Maison Verlaine for months. Tonight was important to me." Giselle fidgeted, looking anywhere but at Evelyn. "I didn't realize," Adrian managed, the words tasting like defeat. "No," Evelyn said softly, "you didn't." She let that hang in the air for a heartbeat too long, then turned to greet another well-wisher, as if he were already forgotten. The moment was captured by at least a dozen photographers. Adrian Locke, millionaire, looking small in his seat while his radiant wife walked away into a wall of flashing cameras. And for the first time in his career, Adrian understood what it felt like to be out of his league. Because tonight, Evelyn hadn't just attended Fashion Week, she had owned it, and every single person in that room knew it. The applause from the runway show still echoed faintly in the marble corridors of the Palais Garnier as the crowd spilled into the VIP lounge. Waiters floated between clusters of guests with trays of champagne, and the scent of white orchids filled the air. Cameras were now forbidden beyond the gilded doors, but the tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Evelyn moved through the lounge like she'd been born to it, calm, elegant, unhurried. Damian Hale stayed at her side, his dark suit immaculate, his presence radiating quiet authority. Fashion editors whispered to each other as she passed, socialites angled for introductions, and designers congratulated her on the night's success. Adrian Locke was nowhere near as composed. He lingered by the far wall, nursing a drink he didn't want. His mind was a storm, half humiliation, half fury. He hadn't been blindsided like that in years, maybe ever. Evelyn, his quiet, accommodating wife, had just pulled the rug out from under him in front of the most powerful people in the fashion world. And she'd done it without raising her voice or breaking a sweat. Giselle stood beside him, her earlier glamour dulled by discomfort. She kept checking her phone, clearly debating whether she should even stay. Adrian caught her doing it and snapped. "Don't." She flinched. Look, maybe I should go." "This isn't my scene anymore." Adrian's jaw tightened. He hated the implication. His scene. As if the room now belonged to Evelyn. As if he were the outsider here. Finally, he spotted his moment. Evelyn had stepped away from Damian to speak to the creative director of Maison Verlaine. Adrian crossed the room quickly, cutting through a knot of investors, and intercepted her near a velvet chaise. "We need to talk," he said, low and urgent. She turned, her expression polite but cool. "Now's not the time, Adrian." "It's exactly the time," he hissed. "You've been playing me. For months." Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper. "Playing you? You make it sound like I owed you the truth about every business decision I make. You're my wife." "I'm also my own person," she said evenly. "That's something you seem to forget." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You made me look like a fool out there, in front of everyone." Evelyn didn't flinch. "No, Adrian. You did that yourself." The words hit harder than he wanted to admit. For a moment, he could only stare at her. "Do you have any idea," he began, "how much I've been trying to get into Verlaine? I've been talking." She cut in, her tone like ice, bragging, dropping hints at every dinner party you could find. "But talking isn't doing. And in the meantime, I was making moves, quietly, strategically, the way business is done when you're not chasing cameras." Adrian's face flushed. "This isn't you. You don't." "Don't what?" she asked softly. "Don't know how to invest. Don't know how to win. I've been investing longer than you've been in the game, Adrian. You just didn't notice because you were too busy looking in the mirror." Behind them, Damian reappeared, his gaze sweeping over Adrian with cool detachment. "Is there a problem here?" Adrian straightened, masking his irritation. "No problem. Just a private conversation between husband and wife." Damian's expression didn't change. "From where I'm standing, it doesn't look very private." Evelyn glanced at Damian, then back at Adrian. "We're done here." For a moment, Adrian thought she meant the conversation. But the finality in her voice told him it was more than that. "Much more." "Done?" he repeated. Evelyn inclined her head slightly. "You'll get the papers soon enough." It was a sucker punch. He'd expected anger, maybe a dramatic scene, but not this calm, surgical strike. And the way she said it, like it was already decided, already in motion, made his stomach twist. "You think you can just—" he began, but she was already turning away, her attention shifting back to Damian and the designer waiting to speak to her. The conversation was over. Adrian stood there, feeling the weight of eyes on him. Not pitying eyes, not exactly. More like the eyes of people who had just realized they'd been betting on the wrong horse. He wanted to storm out, but leaving would be surrender. So he stayed, lingering in the shadows while Evelyn moved through the room, shaking hands and making deals. Every laugh, every nod, every perfectly timed remark was another reminder that she was operating on a level he couldn't reach anymore. At one point, Giselle drifted back toward him, her voice small. "She's impressive." He didn't respond. By the time Evelyn and Damian left together, escorted to a waiting black Bentley, the buzz in the VIP lounge was deafening. The story of the night wasn't the Verlaine collection, it was Evelyn Locke's public ascension. And every person in that room would carry the tale back to their own circles. Adrian remained behind, his drink long gone, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He told himself this wasn't over. He would find a way to regain the upper hand. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to look at too closely, he knew the truth. Tonight, the balance of power in their marriage had shifted. And it wasn't shifting back. The Bentley's leather interior was warm and quiet, a stark contrast to the electric chaos of the Palais Garnier. Paris shimmered outside the tinted windows, its streets glowing under golden lamps. Evelyn sat back, her hands resting over the curve of her belly. She could still feel the heat of Adrian's anger from moments ago, his voice low and sharp, the way he'd looked at her like she was suddenly a stranger. Damien Hale sat beside her, one hand holding a glass of still water, the other resting casually on his knee. He didn't pry, didn't fill the silence with empty words. Damien was like that. He understood the value of quiet, the way it gave someone room to think. Finally, Evelyn exhaled slowly. "It's strange," she murmured, her voice steady. "How you can spend years trying to protect someone, only to realize you were protecting the wrong person." Damien glanced at her, his dark eyes thoughtful. "You weren't protecting him," he said. "You were protecting the version of yourself that believed in him." She smiled faintly, a sad curve of lips. "I suppose that's true." For years, Evelyn had believed her patience would pay off, that her quiet support, her willingness to let Adrian take the spotlight, would be repaid with loyalty. She'd watched him grow from a hungry entrepreneur into a polished figure in society, thinking they were building something together. But somewhere along the line, she had become a prop in his story, rather than a partner. Her fingers traced the diamond edge of her engagement ring. It had once symbolized promise. Now it felt like a relic from a life she'd outgrown. "You know," Damien said, breaking the quiet, "you handled yourself flawlessly tonight. If I didn't know you, I'd think you'd been planning that reveal for months." Evelyn turned to look at him. "I was planning it for months, I just didn't know it until recently." The truth was, her decision to invest in Maison Verlaine hadn't started as revenge. It had started as an opportunity, a way to diversify her portfolio, to support a brand she believed in. But once she learned about Giselle, about Adrian's plans to use Fashion Week as a platform to flaunt her, the investment became something more, a statement. A line in the sand. Damien nodded slowly. "What's next?" Evelyn's gaze shifted to the passing streets, to the glittering Seine in the distance. "Next," she said, "I make sure tonight wasn't just a spectacle. I make sure it counts." They arrived at her Paris apartment, a penthouse overlooking Place Vendôme. She'd bought it years ago under a holding company, one of the many properties Adrian had no idea existed. The doorman greeted her by name, his smile warm, his tone respectful. Inside, the space was serene. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city, the Eiffel Tower glowing in the distance. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. The scent of fresh lilies filled the air. Evelyn slipped off her heels, grateful for the cool marble under her feet. She walked to the window, watching the lights dance on the river. In the reflection she saw herself, the emerald gown, the diamond earrings, the poise she had maintained all night. And she saw the shadow of the woman she used to be, standing behind her. The old Evelyn would have gone home to Adrian, tried to talk it out, tried to find common ground. But that woman was gone. In her place was someone who had learned that silence could be strategy, and that strategy could be power. Her phone buzzed on the glass coffee table. It was a message from her attorney in London. "All documents are ready. Just say the word." She typed back, "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Another buzz, this time from the CEO of Maison Verlaine. "Incredible night. The press is already calling you the silent queen of Fashion Week. Are you ready for interviews?" Evelyn smiled. "Yes. Let's make sure the right stories are told." Damien reappeared from the kitchen with 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You've already made headlines," he said, handing her one. "I know," she replied. "But headlines fade. I want results that last." She wasn't talking about the fashion world. She was talking about her life, about ensuring Adrian couldn't undermine her again, financially or emotionally. As they talked, her mind spun through the steps ahead. She would finalize the divorce, secure her assets, and then she would expand her influence. Board seats, strategic partnerships, investments that would make her name synonymous with power in industries far beyond fashion. She thought of the baby, safe and steady inside her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about creating a future where her child would never have to watch someone they loved diminish them. Later, when Damien left, she lingered at the window, the city still alive below. She could see the Palais Garnier in the distance, its golden roof gleaming under the night sky. Just hours ago she'd walked into that building as someone underestimated. She had walked out as someone unforgettable. Her phone buzzed one last time before she went to bed. A message from an unknown number. "Enjoy your moment, Evelyn. It won't last." She didn't need to ask who it was from. Adrian's arrogance still bled through every word. She set the phone down without replying. Because she knew something he didn't. This was only the beginning. Adrian Locke had never been one to take a public humiliation quietly. By the time he returned to his Paris hotel that night, the sting of Evelyn's reveal had curdled into a dangerous mix of rage and calculation. He paced the suite like a caged predator, still in his tuxedo, tie loosened, the champagne from earlier long gone from his system. Giselle sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through social media. Her feed was flooded with clips from the show. Evelyn's entrance, the emerald gown named after her, the moment she crossed the runway to speak to Adrian. Each video had the same tone in the comments. Evelyn Locke, the surprise queen of Fashion Week, and Adrian Locke, the man who didn't see it coming. "Turn that off," Adrian snapped. Giselle set the phone down reluctantly. "You're everywhere right now, and not in the good way." He stopped pacing, running a hand over his face. "That's exactly why I can't sit here and do nothing. I need to control the narrative before she does." Giselle tilted her head. "What are you going to do?" She's not exactly powerless." Adrian smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. "She's still my wife. Which means there are things I know about her, her investments, her family, that could be persuasive." By morning he had a plan. He called his PR consultant in London, instructing her to arrange interviews with select business outlets. The angle was simple. Adrian Locke, visionary investor, poised to make a major move in the fashion industry, and his supportive wife standing behind him. If he could muddy the waters, make it seem like Evelyn's role was merely an extension of his own, he could take back some of the spotlight. The first interview took place in a glossy Parisian café, with a photographer snapping casual shots of Adrian hard at work over espresso. He spoke about his mutual vision with his wife, making sure to drop lines like, "Evelyn and I always discuss big moves together, and this fashion week has been a shared milestone for us." It was a calculated fiction, but he delivered it with the easy charm that had once won Evelyn over. By the afternoon, the quotes were already circulating online, but Evelyn was 2 steps ahead. When her phone buzzed with a message from her publicist, "Adrian's doing interviews, framing you as a team," she didn't get angry. She smiled. "Perfect," she said, dialing Damien. 2 hours later, Evelyn was seated in a private suite at the Ritz, being interviewed by one of the most respected journalists in European finance. Unlike Adrian's puff pieces, this interview was fact-heavy. Bolstered by documentation Evelyn had prepared weeks ago. Proof of her independent investments, her leadership in philanthropic initiatives, and her majority stake in Maison Verlaine. She didn't mention Adrian once, not by name, not by implication. She simply told her story, presenting herself as the architect of her own success. When the article went live the next morning, the headline read, "Evelyn Locke, the billion-dollar investor Fashion Week didn't see coming." It hit harder than any press Adrian could buy. The comment sections turned against him quickly. People began pointing out inconsistencies in his interviews, comparing them to Evelyn's verifiable claims. Some even dug up old photos of him at events without her, juxtaposed with images of Evelyn alongside international CEOs and philanthropists. By midday, Evelyn Locke was trending across Europe and the US. Adrian's frustration boiled over. He called Evelyn directly. "You think you're clever," he said without preamble. "I don't think," she replied calmly. "I know. You're making me look like the villain. You don't need my help for that." There was a pause on the line, sharp as a blade. "Careful, Evelyn," he said finally. "This little game you're playing, it can get ugly." She almost laughed. "You still don't get it. This isn't a game. This is my life, and I'm done letting you write my part in it." She hung up before he could answer. That evening, Adrian attended a networking dinner with potential investors for his own venture. Normally, he would have commanded the table, but tonight, every conversation seemed to circle back to Evelyn, How stunning she'd looked, how masterfully she'd positioned herself, how much influence she clearly wielded. It wasn't just embarrassing, it was destabilizing. Adrian thrived on being the man people wanted to align with. Now, he was in danger of becoming the man they avoided. Back in his hotel room, he stared out over the Paris skyline, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. He needed a bigger move, something that would remind everyone he was still a force. He called an associate in Monaco. "I want the Verlaine board on the phone tomorrow. If she thinks she can lock me out, she's wrong." What Adrian didn't realize was that Evelyn had anticipated this too. She had already secured clauses in her investment contract that limited outside acquisitions, especially from parties with personal conflicts of interest. Adrian would find himself blocked before he even began. The following day, when his Monaco contact called back to say the deal was impossible, Adrian's temper finally cracked. "This isn't over," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. But deep down, he was beginning to feel the first, uncomfortable truth creeping in. Evelyn wasn't just winning battles, she was dismantling his war before he could even march. And the more he tried to fight her in public, the more the world seemed to choose her side. 3 days after Fashion Week, Paris had already moved on to the next headline. But Evelyn Locke hadn't. She was in her penthouse office overlooking Place Vendôme, sipping chamomile tea as the morning sun spilled across her desk. The Verlaine deal was secure, the press coverage overwhelmingly in her favor, and Adrian's attempted spin had fizzled out. But she wasn't content with holding her ground. She wanted to make a move so decisive that Adrian and everyone watching would understand there was no going back. Her laptop chimed with an incoming video call. On the screen appeared the chairman of Delacroix International, a luxury conglomerate with holdings across fashion, cosmetics, and hospitality. Behind him, the sleek skyline of Geneva gleamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Mrs. Locke," he greeted warmly. "I trust Fashion Week was eventful?" Evelyn's lips curved. "Let's just say it was productive. Now, about the acquisition we discussed." Within an hour, the deal was in motion. Evelyn would purchase a controlling interest in Argent Capital, a boutique investment firm known for its aggressive plays in luxury markets. Argent's portfolio included several brands that directly competed with Locke Ventures, Adrian's company. It was a masterstroke, subtle enough to be legitimate business, but pointed enough to hit Adrian where it hurt most: his ability to close deals in the luxury sector. By noon, whispers were already circulating in London and New York. Adrian Locke's estranged wife had just taken a position that could undercut his expansion plans for the next 2 years. When Adrian heard, he was in a conference call with potential backers for his Monaco project. His assistant slid a note across the table. "Locke's wife buys into Argent Capital." He read it twice, the words sinking in like cold water. "What's this about Argent?" one of the investors on the call asked, clearly having seen the same headlines. Adrian forced a chuckle. "Just a minor portfolio shift, nothing that affects us." But it did affect them, and everyone in the room knew it. Argent's reach was wide, its influence growing, and now Evelyn had a seat at the table. Back in Paris, Evelyn's day continued with a quiet efficiency that belied the storm she'd just unleashed. She met with her legal team to finalize her divorce filings, reviewed proposals from charitable foundations she supported, and took a call from the CEO of Maison Verlaine about the brand's post-Fashion Week sales spike. "Your segment," the CEO said, "has driven a 40% increase in pre-orders. Retailers are calling this the Evelyn effect." She laughed softly. "Let's make sure it lasts. Expand the campaign into Asia." Her phone buzzed with a message, this one from Damien. Well played. He won't recover from this quickly. That evening, Evelyn attended a private charity gala at the Hotel de Crillon. It was a glittering affair, the kind of event where fortunes were made and lost over champagne toasts. She wore a midnight blue gown with a diamond bracelet that caught the light every time she lifted her glass. Midway through the evening, she felt the shift in the room, the subtle ripple that told her Adrian had arrived. He was in a dark suit, perfectly pressed, his smallish but brittle. He approached her with the poise of a man who refused to admit defeat. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked. "I am," she said smoothly. "And you?" "I was," he replied, "until I heard about Argent Capital." She took a slow sip of champagne. Business is business, Adrian. You taught me that. His jaw tightened. You're making this personal. It became personal, she said, her voice low, the moment you decided my worth was measured by how quietly I stood next to you. He glanced around, noting the guests who were watching them discreetly. We can still fix this. Together we could. No, she cut in. Together we were a facade. Alone, I'm a force. The words landed like a slap, though her tone never rose above polite conversation. Adrian's smile faltered just enough for her to see the crack beneath. Before he could respond, a mutual acquaintance approached to congratulate Evelyn on her new role at Argent. She accepted graciously, her hand resting lightly on the man's arm as she turned away from Adrian. For the rest of the evening, she didn't look his way. She didn't need to. She knew the image was burned into his mind. Evelyn Locke, radiant, in demand, untouchable. 2 days later, the business press exploded with coverage of the Argent acquisition. Headlines framed it as a seismic shift in the luxury investment landscape. Analysts speculated openly about how Adrian's ventures might struggle under the new competitive pressure. Evelyn read the articles over breakfast, the Paris skyline bright against a cloudless sky. She wasn't gloating, not exactly. She was simply satisfied. She had taken back control. And in doing so, she'd reminded herself and the world that her identity was not tied to Adrian Locke. It never had been. Still, she knew this was not the end. Adrian was prideful, and prideful men didn't retreat quietly. He would try something, perhaps something reckless. But for now, she allowed herself to enjoy the calm. She had the advantage, and she intended to keep it. Because power wasn't just about winning the battle, it was about holding the ground you'd claimed. Adrian Locke had always believed he could outthink anyone. But by the end of the week, he was beginning to understand a painful truth. Evelyn wasn't playing defense anymore. She was advancing, and every move she made was cutting off one of his escape routes. The Argent Capital acquisition had blindsided him. His Monaco deal was stalled. Potential investors were suddenly reassessing priorities, which was polite code for, we don't want to be on the losing side. And to make matters worse, Evelyn's face was everywhere. Magazines, business profiles, even the Sunday morning political shows. For the first time in his career, Adrian felt the clock ticking against him. If he didn't make a decisive move soon, he'd lose not just his influence, but the very perception of power that kept doors open for him. So he decided to gamble. In the polished conference room of his Paris hotel, he met with two men he normally wouldn't be seen with: Vincent Duval, a sharp-eyed fixer with deep connections in European media, and Sergei Morozov, a venture capitalist whose money was clean but whose methods were not. Adrian leaned forward, his voice low. I need information. Something that will hit her hard enough to shake her foundation. I don't care how you get it. Duval exchanged a look with Sergei. You're talking about Evelyn Locke. The press loves her right now. If you want to change that, you'll need more than gossip. Then get me more than gossip, Adrian said, his jaw tight. There's always a crack in the armor. Within 48 hours, Duval's team began digging through Evelyn's business history, her charitable foundations, even her family's old holdings. They found nothing illegal, but that wasn't the point. The goal was to twist perception. One afternoon, Duval slid a slim file across the table to Adrian. Inside were grainy photographs of Evelyn meeting privately with Damien Hale in Geneva 6 months earlier. The meetings were entirely above board, discussions about a philanthropic tech fund. But Duval had a plan. We leak these, Duval said, and frame it as an affair. Tie it to her current alliance with Hale. People will wonder if this has been going on behind your back for years. Adrian frowned. She'll deny it. Of course she will, Duval said smoothly, but the seed will be planted, and you'll be the wronged husband in the public eye. It was risky, messy even, but Adrian saw the value. If he could shift public sympathy in his favor, it might cool Evelyn's momentum long enough for him to rebuild. The leak happened on a Thursday morning. A mid-tier gossip blog posted the photos with a headline designed to sting. Evelyn Locke's billionaire business partner, more than just business? By noon, larger outlets had picked it up, each one adding their own spin. Some framed it as speculation, others as near certainty. Social media erupted with side-by-side photos of Evelyn and Damien at Fashion Week, at charity galas, and now in Geneva. Adrian gave one carefully timed interview to a London paper. He didn't accuse her directly. He didn't need to. "Marriage is complicated," he said somberly. "I've always trusted Evelyn, but I suppose everyone sees what they want to see." The sympathy poured in. Messages from old contacts, condolences from acquaintances, even a few investors who'd gone quiet began calling again. For the first time in weeks, Adrian felt the tide turning. But Evelyn wasn't rattled. That evening she stood on the balcony of her Paris apartment, the city lights stretching out before her, her phone pressed to her ear. "Let them run the story," she told Damien, her voice steady. "The truth is stronger than any rumor." "You're sure?" Damien asked. "Absolutely. We're going to turn this on him." The next morning, Evelyn's team released a statement, not defensive, but factual. It outlined her joint philanthropic work with Damien, complete with dates, financial records, and testimonials from third-party organizations. They didn't just deny the affair, they showcased the humanitarian projects the meetings had produced. Then, in a move that caught even her own publicist off guard, Evelyn went live on a primetime talk show that same evening. She appeared poised and warm, her emerald eyes steady as she spoke directly to the host. "I understand that rumors sell," she said, "but I also understand that my reputation is built on transparency. If anyone wants to question my integrity, they can look at the work I've done. The record speaks for itself." The host asked about Adrian. Evelyn smiled faintly. "I wish him well, truly, but I won't allow my life's work to be reduced to tabloid speculation." The audience applauded. The clip went viral. By the weekend, the narrative had shifted again. What began as a scandal was now being framed as yet another example of Evelyn's grace under fire. Headlines praised her composure, calling her a masterclass in reputation management. Adrian read those headlines in his hotel room, the file from Duval still on the table. The gamble had failed. Worse, it had backfired, making Evelyn look even stronger. That night, over a drink with Sergei, Adrian muttered, "She's untouchable." Sergei shrugged. "No one's untouchable. But you, my friend, you might be running out of moves." Adrian didn't respond. For the first time he wondered if Sergei was right, because if every risk only made her stronger, maybe the real gamble was thinking he could win at all. The week after the failed smear campaign, Evelyn Locke's name was no longer just trending. It was cemented. Fashion blogs called her the Emerald Queen. Business journals labeled her a market disruptor. And on social media, she was the face of a new wave of women reclaiming their power in male-dominated industries. Adrian, meanwhile, was shrinking from the public eye. The investors who had cautiously reappeared during the rumor storm had vanished again, their interest soured by Evelyn's poised rebuttal. His Monaco project was on indefinite hold. And now, whispers in the business community suggested he was unreliable and bad optics. Evelyn decided it was time to end this, decisively, surgically, and on her terms. She called a meeting in London, inviting select journalists, industry leaders, and potential partners. The venue was the glass-walled top floor of the Hartwell Group's headquarters, a space she rarely used, but one that carried undeniable weight. Damien Hale was there, as were the CEOs of Maison Verlaine and Argent Capital. Even her father, Charles Hartwell, attended, standing quietly in the back as Evelyn prepared her remarks. When the room settled, she stepped to the podium. The view of the Thames shimmered behind her, but her eyes were fixed on her audience. "Tonight," she began, "I'm announcing the launch of the Locke Hartwell Initiative, a global investment fund dedicated to empowering female entrepreneurs in emerging markets. Our goal is to channel over £2 billion into sustainable, women-led businesses over the next 5 years." The room buzzed with excitement. Cameras flashed. Evelyn continued, outlining the initiative's scope, its partners, and most importantly, its leadership. "I will personally oversee the fund," she said, alongside an advisory board of global industry leaders. "And I want to be clear, this is not a vanity project. This is a movement." Every word was deliberate. Every slide of her presentation reinforced her position, not as someone riding on family wealth or a husband's connections, but as a visionary in her own right. Then came the moment that turned the announcement into a checkmate. "Many of you know my personal life has been discussed in recent weeks," she said, her tone calm. "I'm not here to litigate gossip, but I am here to say this. Leadership means accountability. And that includes choosing the people you align yourself with. She paused, letting the room breathe. That's why, as of this week, the Locke Hartwell Initiative will also acquire controlling interest in Locke Ventures' luxury sector assets. The effect was immediate. Gasps rippled through the room. Locke Ventures, Adrian's company, would lose its most lucrative division overnight. The assets would be folded into the initiative, restructured under Evelyn's leadership, and rebranded. In one move, she had taken not just the crown jewel of Adrian's empire, but the symbol of his status in the luxury market, and she had done it publicly, with cameras rolling. Reporters scrambled to confirm the details, but Evelyn pressed on, closing with a vision of global change, mentorship programs, and long-term impact. When the event ended, the headlines were already writing themselves. Evelyn Locke outmaneuvers estranged husband in landmark acquisition. Adrian learned of it while sitting in a Mayfair club, sipping whiskey he couldn't taste. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Texts from colleagues, investors, even his own board members. One message stood out: "We need to talk. Urgent." He didn't go to the boardroom. He went home. Hours later, Evelyn received a short email from him. "You've made your point." She didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. That evening, she attended a private dinner with Damien and several initiative partners at the Dorchester. Laughter and champagne flowed, but Evelyn kept her focus. This wasn't about celebrating Adrian's fall. It was about building something bigger in its place. When the dinner ended, she stepped out into the cool London night. The city hummed with life around her. She pulled her coat tighter, feeling the weight of the last few weeks lift from her shoulders. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from the press, an opinion piece titled, "Evelyn Locke, Proof that the Best Revenge is Success." She read it, smiling faintly. The article framed her as the antithesis of pettiness, someone who had risen above betrayal to create tangible change. It was exactly the narrative she wanted. Across the city, Adrian sat alone in his apartment, staring out at the same skyline. The chessboard between them was empty now. Evelyn had taken the king, the queen, and every piece that mattered. All he had left was the memory of a game he thought he could win. For Evelyn, it wasn't about the win anymore. It was about what came next. The initiative was more than a final blow. It was a beginning. And she intended to make it count. Because true checkmate isn't just ending the game. It's building a new one where you set all the rules. 2 weeks after the Locke Hartwell Initiative's launch, the whirlwind around Evelyn Locke began to settle. Not because interest faded, but because the narrative had shifted entirely. She was no longer the estranged wife of a millionaire. She was a philanthropist, an investor, and a woman whose name was becoming synonymous with transformation. On a crisp spring morning in London, she stood at the entrance of a community innovation center in Brixton, one of the initiative's first funded projects. Children in bright uniforms ran across the courtyard, their laughter mixing with the chatter of local entrepreneurs setting up inside. This was what she wanted the headlines to be about. Not scandals or revenge, but opportunity. Damien was there too, greeting guests and coordinating with the press. When he saw her pause to watch the children, he walked over. "Not bad for the first month," he said with a smile. "Not bad at all," she replied, her gaze warm. "This is what matters. This is where the real change happens." The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a crowd of community leaders, journalists, and partners. Evelyn spoke briefly, focusing on the center's mission to provide resources for women-led startups, job training, and mentorship programs. Her voice was clear, steady, and without a trace of the turbulence that had marked her recent months. After the event, she sat in the sunlit atrium with a young woman named Lila, one of the center's first grant recipients. Lila's eyes were bright with hope as she explained her business plan for an eco-friendly clothing line. "No one ever believed I could do this," Lila admitted. Evelyn smiled gently. "People will doubt you until the moment they can't ignore you anymore. The trick is to keep building until that moment comes." Lila's gratitude was genuine, and Evelyn felt a swell of quiet pride. She had turned her own pain into purpose, and that purpose was already touching lives. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner of London, Adrian was making his own decisions. The loss of his luxury assets had forced him to sell a portion of Locke Ventures. He told himself it was a strategic pivot, But deep down, he knew it was the cost of losing to someone who had outplayed him at every turn. He saw Evelyn's name on the news almost daily, but the sting had dulled. Somewhere along the line, he had stopped trying to win her back or beat her, and had started trying simply to move on. One evening, Evelyn received an email from him. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was close. "You've built something impressive. I hope it works out for you. For both of you." She read it twice, then closed her laptop without replying. Not out of malice, but because some chapters didn't need a final conversation. They needed to stay closed. That weekend, Evelyn attended a gala at the Victoria and Albert Museum, her first purely social event since the storm had begun. She wore a simple ivory gown, her hair swept up, no emeralds, no dramatic statements. She didn't need them anymore. The whispers in the room weren't about her personal life, but about her projects, her results, and the deals she was quietly making behind the scenes. Midway through the evening, she stepped out onto the museum's balcony. London stretched before her, glittering under the night sky. Damien joined her, offering a glass of champagne. "You've done it," he said simply. She took the glass, considering his words. "No," she said softly. "I've started it. There's still so much to do." They stood in companionable silence, the city humming below. Evelyn thought of the months behind her, the betrayal, the public humiliation, the long nights of planning, and of the months ahead, filled with work, growth, and purpose. The initiative had already secured projects in Kenya, Brazil, and India. She was scheduled to speak at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And there were whispers, good whispers, about a possible book deal. Not about scandal, but about strategy and resilience. When she finally returned inside, a reporter stopped her near the coat check. "Mrs. Locke, one question," he said. "If you could sum up the last few months in one lesson, what would it be?" She paused, then smiled. "That a woman's strength isn't in what she endures, it's in what she builds after." The quote made the next day's headlines. Weeks later, as she boarded a flight to Nairobi for the initiative's first international summit, Evelyn looked out at the runway and felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in years. She was no longer running from anything. Not from Adrian, not from the past, not from the version of herself who had once been content to stand in the background. She had stepped forward, and she was never stepping back. Because in the end, the greatest victory wasn't proving someone wrong, it was proving yourself right. All right, my friends. So that's how our story comes to a close. You're still here with me right now, aren't you? If you've stayed until this moment, it means something in this journey has touched your heart in a way that's hard to put into words. And maybe, just maybe, it's because you've seen a part of yourself in Evelyn's story. Life will give us moments when we're underestimated, betrayed, or pushed aside. But like the Stoics taught us, the obstacle is the way. Marcus Aurelius. Every setback can become a stepping stone if we choose to see it as one. Evelyn's journey reminds us that true strength isn't about loud revenge. It's about building something so solid, so meaningful, that it speaks louder than any words. Remember what Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Evelyn could have let bitterness define her, but instead she chose growth, dignity, and purpose. And that's something each of us can do, whether in business, relationships, or our own inner battles. If there's one takeaway from all this, it's that your value is never defined by how others see you. It's defined by how you see yourself and the actions you take when no one is watching. You are allowed to walk away from what no longer serves you. You are allowed to rewrite the script. And you are capable of becoming the kind of person who doesn't just survive storms, you learn to dance in the rain. So if this story has resonated with you, if you felt that little spark inside, do me a favor, hit that like button, share this with someone who might need the reminder, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing stories that inspire and heal.